Hello, welcome to Biblical Greek with ExGarage podcast. I'm Heath Robertson, and I will be walking us through Mounce's Biblical Greek. It's actually entitled Basics of Biblical Greek Grammar by William D. Mounce. I have the third edition. You could probably use the fourth edition as well and be fine. You might notice some areas where maybe a page number is off or something like that. I don't know how much updating was done between the two, but I'm sure the content and the chapters, hopefully all those central points you'll be able to follow if you have the newer edition. And so in this video, we're going to actually just go through chapter 1 and chapter 2. I'm walking through it. I don't really have a script, so I'm going to try to make these succinct, try to stay on the points that are going to be good for getting to do good biblical exegesis, so drawing meaning out from the text, understanding Greek, so that after you watch these videos, you'd be able to go to the biblical text and begin to see exactly what's going on in a Greek sentence, and draw out the meaning that's right before our eyes, picking up on all the nuances, asking yourself the question, what's the main verb? Who or what is the object? What's qualifying the verb? Is it modifying it? How is it? And you'll be asking all those questions and really come away with hopefully just a much more rich foundation of biblical interpretation, biblical exegesis, and it would support your ministry, whatever that is, whatever your ministry is, whether it's pastoral, just preaching the word faithfully according to your best ability, whether it's just having skills in general to be able to engage the critical commentaries where they often will cite the Greek, and then you aren't able to really get into it and know what's going on. Having a basic understanding of Greek will help you with that. It'll help you maybe with, if you're like ExGarage, oftentimes we engage other worldviews. In fact, that's what our channel is about. And so we need to know sometimes, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, why they translate Jesus was a God rather than Jesus was all the qualities of God, without confusing Jesus with the Father. There's a certain way the Greek construction there is laid out that denotes Jesus as qualitatively all the attributes of God are identified with the Word, yet the Word is not confused with the Father, God the Father. So we have the Trinitarian real construction in the Greek that and context determines that. Anyhow, those types of moves you can be able to make once you get into Greek. That level maybe depends on the individual. Could be year 2, maybe even by the end of year 1, maybe before that, maybe 18 weeks in, you'll have Greek down if you've spent time in other languages, and you already have a good start on what an adjective is, what an adverb is. I mean, you might just fly through these videos and fly to the end of the book. So that's I had learned Hebrew first, spent my time at Moody Bible doing Hebrew. Learned Greek over a summer on my own, about 18 weeks of going through Mounce, and then I tested out of Greek 1 and 2, I think, in my master's, and then did exegesis, biblical Greek, intermediate biblical Greek, so we did form and function, which we'll talk about in a while down the road. Basically the form what form a verb will take or a participle, any part of speech takes in a text, and then you say what its function is in the text. What's it doing in the text? How is it? Why is it there? Anyhow, that stuff we'll concern about later. But anyhow, so I have a background. Most of my background is in Hebrew, but with that background, I was able to get into Greek and understand things much quicker. So if that's you, this whole thing, the introduction, all these things, I'd still say watch them, catch anything that might be helpful, but you might fly through everything. However, if you're on the opposite end where you haven't done much study, you don't know the difference between an adjective and an adverb, like myself when I started Hebrew, I didn't know the difference between them. I could use them properly in a sentence, but I couldn't tell someone, the big man. I wouldn't be able to say big as an adjective. I would just as much call that an adverb. So if you're in that ballpark, you still don't feel like starting Greek's going to be it's just if you sense maybe a little bit like you're wanting to do this, so you're here, but then you're kind of overwhelmed. All these this language about grammar and talk of grammar. Uh, yeah, don't let that bog you down. That'll all come to life as you continue to go through each chapter. You'll be confronted with the important terms like subject and object and verb, and all these things will come up so often that it'll become more and more second nature, second hand. But so no matter where you're at in the spectrum, hopefully this is helpful. So we're going to go through chapter 1 and 2, and it'll be helpful to your ministry, whatever that is, whether you're reaching out to other worldviews, world religions with the gospel and the gospel truth, just trying to do personal exegesis, good biblical studies, pastoral or otherwise. So chapter 1, the Greek language. He writes a lot here. I would just say read through it. I think that some takeaways are that's kind of really meaningful is that the alphabet was derived from the Phoenician alphabet. Phoenician was understood and according to current, all the data we have is that was a place that the first linear alphabetic script was developed. Interestingly enough, Phoenician, that linear script was also that of the Paleo-Hebrew, the first Hebrew script, and basically the languages around Palestine in the Middle East there are derivative of that, of the Phoenician in the linear script, and that was the same language around, I think, the 10th century BC, 9th, probably, I don't know, around then that's where the Greek developed from the Phoenician as well. So if you look at the Greek alphabet, compare it to the Hebrew alphabet, you're going to notice really close similarities, and that's because they're all rooted in the same family coming off of the Phoenician. Again, that's off the best historical data that's there. But the amazing thing there is that the time Moses would have been writing the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, he would have had the ability to write that early Hebrew form of the linear script and really making sense of reality in a very particular way, having prepositions and nouns and as you get into Greek, the language gets really particular in each part of speech and what it's doing. When I say part of speech, I mean everything from the preposition to the subject, to the verb, to the participle. Participle is just think of it as something that can modify the verb, add more to it. It also can act as a noun. They do a lot of things. We'll talk about that later. It's nothing to be worried about right now or ever be worried about. That stuff will come along as you're working through it. So anyway, yeah, that sophisticated way of communicating was early on. So by Moses, 14 BC, around then, don't quote me, would have had this. So the Hebrew language is sophisticated in its own way, and so there's a lot of misnomers that the Hebrew language was kind of a early pre-real where we grew to really think more specifically about things and philosophically. That's just a bunch of, it's just not true. Yeah, so I'll stop on that. So it's cool to see that note there. The Koine Greek is what you're learning. You're not learning what is also called for Greek is Attic Greek, which would be before Koine, I think. Yeah, it would be more a Greek that was had really a sharper way of its use of the parts of speech syntactically. It was much more structured, where Koine Greek has a little more flexibility maybe and some simplification, and that's an area that I'm not as well studied. You might look into that distinctions between Koine and Attic Greek, but you're learning Koine, which was the common language of the time of the New Testament writers and even before them. But Koine just means common. It was used by everyone in the known world. and that was the language used in the New Testament. So he does mention that this was the language used of the Septuagint, which of course was before the New Testament. So when you learn Koine Greek, you're learning the Old Testament Greek, the Septuagint, otherwise known as the LXX. And so you're kind of doing double work here by learning Koine Greek in the New Testament. You're also going to be able to use those skills when reading the Septuagint, which is very important in biblical studies, as the New Testament authors are quoting from the Old Testament Septuagint as their primary text when quoting from the Old Testament. Again, they're speaking to the context of their time using Koine Greek, the known language. And there's some Hebraisms in the way in which some authors in the New Testament write, given that they were from a Hebrew background, such as Paul. And so, anyhow, it's just fun. You learn this, you learn the Septuagint in the Old Testament. Good stuff. There are, as he say, 2 lessons from this introduction in the Greek language. He says, in the fullness of time, God sent his Son, Galatians 4:4, and part of the fullness of time was the universal language. So it was preaching the gospel at a time that the whole known world could readily receive the gospel. Pretty cool. But even going back to my earlier point, even talk about the fullness of time, God's, as he's revealing himself throughout history, and history is moving according to God's covenant promises and his plan of salvation, and revealing his glory as he has planned before the foundations of the world. That even at Moses' time, that Moses came up and he rose up at a time where he could write in a very sophisticated way and communicate God's word, his revelation to Israel, and then by extension all of the world, to understand and really come back to what happened, i.e. Genesis, how we were created, when we fell, and God's purposes of redemption through his Son. All that is just the whole timeline of God's speaking to us by his word. The humble means of preaching, the humble means of his word, is where he, by his Spirit, calls us and encounters us and transforms us. Just, it's a beautiful picture that God is sovereignly over this whole process, even historically. I mean, the history is God's work. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there's no history apart from biblical history. So yeah, that's fun stuff. He says, for those who are into pastoral, have a pastoral heart, God used the common language to communicate the gospel. That is pretty cool. Is that the gospel is understood by it can be as readily received and understood by a child as much as it could be forever learned and appreciated, and new treasures come out of it by the most so-called wise of believers. So the goal, chapter 2, the main purpose of writing this book is to help you to understand better, to communicate more clearly the Word of God. Yeah, and so in the videos with myself leading these, it's really going to be about exegesis. Communicating Word of God. That's kind of more of that pastoral language. But not only that, just even for your own personal development, enrichment, we would be faithful biblical interpreters, and we would, by God's Spirit, come before Scriptures. Calvin would say we would meet the face of Christ as with unveiled face by the Spirit as we approach Scripture. We're really learning about the nature and character of our God and who He is, and so there's just this richness and this wealth that we get even in our own personal lives as we get into the text and ask the questions that dig out all the meaning, as much meaning as we place put on our hearts to dig out. All best commentaries use, so he's saying basically the goal here is that you might have various reasons why you're learning Greek, but the clear ones are you can begin to do good biblical interpretation. You can then communicate that better even to others, and also even in your, like I mentioned at the beginning, textual commentaries or critical commentaries that use the languages, you'll be able to get into that. You not just kind of pass over it and kind of get a rough understanding of what they're saying. You'll be able to get into that. If you're using Bible software like Logos, you'll be able to get, you'll understand exactly when you put your cursor over a word and it says it's a present active indicative. You'll know what that all means, and you'll also know later as you get into, if you take Greek beyond here, you'll go into maybe doing Wallace's Greek grammar beyond the basics. I'd say it'd be a nice book after you do this. Nothing to be overwhelmed with. I don't know why I'm showing you that. This was just sitting here. I have it sitting out all the time. But it just gives you a lot to look forward to. That's just a book where you can just open up a certain section on a verb and see how a particular form of a verb behaves in various New Testament contexts, and then you can use that information and make your own judgments. So it gives you a lot of freedom learning the languages. You're not just stuck on English translations, looking at 6 English translations and then making judgments there. You're actually looking at the biblical text and making your judgments, and then you also can look at what the translation committees did with the various translation decisions they made. And note, translations, they have different intentions in mind, and so thus oftentimes you have the literal, the dynamic equivalent, the thought for thought, the paraphrase, etc. They have different reasons why they're doing what they're doing, and you'll be able to see all that. So memorization. In order to learn any language, memorization is vital. Yeah, so memorization is really, it is vital, but just also note that when you see that language, it could kind of come off daunting. Like, phew, well, I don't memorize what day it is oftentimes, or I forget this and that. Again, the memorization kind of comes as you turn the page. You go into each chapter, you're confronted with the same terms, so it almost becomes as you just apply yourself a little bit of time each day, or maybe so many days a week. I'd say as you're starting this, you should probably, just so you don't lose it, dedicate at least, well, I don't want to put a number on it. You know your own capabilities, you know your own schedule. I'd say the, what would say the word, the optimal would be to do it every day, at least 15 minutes to 30 minutes, or maybe every other day where you're doing an hour or 40 minutes in the mornings. Set aside 40 minutes maybe as your devotional time, read a verse, maybe in English, and then you do your chapter in Greek and pray and do your devotion with Greek for 18 weeks and go through this, whatever it takes. So, but you'll get it down with just staying disciplined and diligent in just sticking with it for that a few months. And many of the vocab terms will become secondhand as well, because you come across them all the time. And some of the words are familiar to begin with, like anthropos. Anthropology means mankind, humankind, humanity. Logos, you're probably familiar with that through pastors and preaching, means the word. So yeah, a lot of the memorization too might even come quicker here, where Hebrew, that sometimes takes longer because the words are not as familiar, except for names we're familiar with, like Abraham. Anyhow, so he says when memorization, use mnemonic devices. He gives an example of the word face is translated prosopon. So he says he memorized it by saying to himself, pour soup on my face. Pour soup on, and then prosopon, sounds similar, but prosopon means face. So pour soup on my face. Whatever it works. I don't think I used anything that complicated. I usually identify a word with something that sounded like or reminded me of. Toavah was a Hebrew word. It just reminded me of just toavah, something not good, or like, whoa, that's an intense word, and it means disgust or abhorrence. So it kind of matches with its sound. So find things that work for you. Helps with memorization. You must pronounce Greek consistently and write it neatly. Yeah, again, just to get to where we're doing exegesis, don't be too concerned with that stuff. You do want to pronounce it consistently, but don't get overwhelmed with that. Don't worry about accents and ups and downs and thing. Just be consistent in how you pronounce each letter, and we'll get to that in chapter 3. If your pronunciation varies, it's difficult to remember, say the words and endings out loud. Yeah, saying things out loud, writing them down, different ways in which you can engage memorization is good. But also, go with whatever time that you have and make best use of that time. If you don't have much time to be writing down vocabulary words, then you just pick up these box sets that Zondervan already has out. They come with already pre-done vocab cards for you. One is Basics of Biblical Greek Vocabulary Cards by Zondervan. It's a blue box. You should see it on Amazon or some other sites. There's also one for Hebrew, but we're not going to talk about that in this. We'll put up our Hebrew series after our Greek. I'm much better in Hebrew, as whatever that means. I mean, I don't claim to be the greatest either, but Hebrew's more I feel my wheelhouse. I've done that longer. So anyhow, but I really enjoy Greek. I enjoy Greek syntax, where you make interpretive moves on how certain cases, which we're going to learn later, are functioning. Ignore the word cases at this moment. We'll get to that chapter 5 maybe. Sorry for clicking my lips together. That's probably annoying. Yeah, I think that's all. Time and consistency he mentions. Discipline is the bottom line on page 6. So that was chapter 1 and 2. Hope this was helpful. Stick with us. Chapter 3 is next. Maybe we'll do chapter 3 and 4 together. And you'll be on your way to doing good biblical exegesis. Again, that's drawing meaning out of the text. Eisegesis is putting your own meaning in the text. As Christians, what's a wonderful truth is that the Spirit guides us and leads us into the text. So when we're reading the text, it's actually God speaking to us, and by the Spirit, it's not like we're doing the interpretation on our own. The Spirit speaks to us in the Word, and there is meaning to be had, and God is voicing that to us. We're not just autonomous creatures applying our own meaning into the text, but faithful biblical exegesis is about applying ourselves to what is there and allowing God's Spirit to guide us in that interpretation. Anyway, enough of that theology. We're just here to learn language.